shout. I didn't cry. I just put down my coffee cup and listened to my daughter breathe on the other end of the line. She was sitting on a wooden bench outside the public library in Asheville. I knew the one. I'd taken her there when she was 7, the summer her father died, to read picture books about brave little girls who outsmarted wolves. 31 years later, she was sitting on that same bench with 2 children and 3 garbage bags, telling me her husband had changed the locks while she was at the pediatrician. "Mama, I have nowhere to go," she said. Her voice was flat. That's what worried me, not tears. Flatness. The voice of a woman who has already started preparing herself to be homeless. I asked her one question. "Are the kids with you right now?" "Both of them. Wesley's asleep in the stroller." "Maren keeps asking where Daddy went." "Stay on that bench," I said. "Don't move. Don't call him. Don't call his mother. I'm leaving in 10 minutes. I hung up. I rinsed my coffee cup. I went upstairs and took off my robe and put on the navy suit I keep ready in the front of my closet for exactly the kind of day I had always quietly known would come. Then I called my driver, told him to bring the Suburban around, and called my attorney before I'd even left the driveway. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. I am 63 years old. My husband, the children's grandfather, passed 20 years ago. I never remarried. I built what I built alone, in a man's industry, in a part of the country where women like me are expected to host charity teas and stay out of the way. I have spent 4 decades being underestimated by people who mistook my politeness for softness. My daughter, God help her, is the only person on this earth I have ever truly been afraid of losing. So when her mother-in-law decided to destroy her, that woman made a mistake she could not possibly have understood. Because the mother-in-law, you see, did not know who I was. She thought I was a quiet widow from a small town in North Carolina who had retired comfortably. She did not know that her son's lifestyle, her own lifestyle, the gated community she lived in, the foundation she chaired, the company her husband ran, none of it existed without me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My daughter's name is Tamsin. She is 38. She married a man named Corbin Hailstrom 9 years ago. And for the first 6 of those years, I believe she was happy. The Hailstroms were what we used to call old Atlanta money, the kind that comes with pearl necklaces and weekend lake houses and a strong family tradition of pretending nothing is wrong. Corbin was charming. He laughed at my jokes. He brought me peonies the first time he met me, which I appreciated even though I knew his mother had told him to. That mother. Celine Hailstrom. 67 years old, perfectly coiffed silver bob, never seen in anything but cream or camel or cashmere. She runs, or used to run, the family's charitable foundation, which exists primarily to put her name on hospital wings. The first time I met her, at the rehearsal dinner, she leaned over the table, looked at my plain wedding band, and said, "How lovely that you've made the trip." I smiled and said, "It's no trouble. I had a meeting in Atlanta anyway." I didn't tell her what the meeting was for. I didn't tell her anything. I let her assume I was a small-town widow with a quilting hobby, because there is information you give people, and there is information you let them earn. Celine Hailstrom never earned it. For 9 years, she treated my daughter like a charity case, corrected her at family dinners, sent her cookbooks for Christmas. Once, when Tamsin was 6 months pregnant with Maren, Celine told her in front of the whole family that she was carrying low, dear, the way the staff's girls do. I watched my daughter's face. I watched her smile. I watched her change the subject, and I made a note because I make notes about everything and I wrote it down in the small leather book I keep in the drawer of my writing desk. I never said anything. Not once. I figured Tamsin was a grown woman, and if she chose not to defend herself, it was not my place to do it for her. I was wrong about that. I want every woman watching this to hear me. I was wrong. There is a kind of cruelty that wears you down so slowly you don't even notice you are bleeding until somebody else points to the floor. The bleeding, in Tamsin's case, started about 14 months ago. That was when Corbin's father, Harlan Hailstrom, died of a stroke. Harlan was the public face of Hailstrom Industries. He was on 3 boards. He had a column in a regional business magazine. People called him a self-made man, which always made me smile, because Harlan Hailstrom had never made anything in his life. He had married Celine, and Celine had what people in our circles politely call family resources. And the resources came from a holding company that bought struggling manufacturing firms in the Carolinas and Tennessee in the late 1980s. That holding company, the one that had funded everything the Hailstroms touched for 35 years, was called Quartz Hollow Capital. I founded Quartz Hollow Capital in 1986, 3 years after I buried my husband. I built it with the modest life insurance payout and a great deal of borrowed faith. By 1991, I owned controlling interest in the parent corporation that owned the parent corporation that owned the company Harlan Hailstrom would later claim he built. Harlan knew. Celine did not. That was a condition I had set in 1992 when Harlan, who had been a clever middle manager with no money, asked me to back his bid for the CEO position. He needed credibility. He needed silent backing. He needed a partner who would never appear at a shareholders meeting or a Christmas party. I needed someone in the public seat while I did the work. We made a deal. He kept the name. I kept the company. Celine Hallestrom, for 33 years, walked around Atlanta thinking she had inherited her husband's empire. She had not. She had married a placeholder. I tell you all this so you understand why, when my daughter called me from that bench in Asheville and told me what her mother-in-law had done, I didn't yell and I didn't cry. I had been planning, in some very small part of my mind, for the day Celine Hallestrom would finally cross a line she could not uncross. I had simply not expected that line to involve my grandchildren. The drive from my home in the foothills to Asheville is about an hour and 40 minutes. I made it in an hour and 10. My driver, Easton, did not ask questions. Easton has been with me 12 years. He knows the difference between the days I want music and the days I want silence. This was a silent day. When we pulled up to the library, I saw her before she saw me. Tamsin was sitting very straight on that bench. Marin, who was 4, was crouched on the ground in front of her, drawing something on the brick walkway with a piece of broken sidewalk chalk. Wesley, who was 1, was asleep in a stroller with his head tipped sideways and a string of drool on his cheek. 3 garbage bags, a diaper bag, a small pink suitcase with a unicorn on it that I had given Marin for her last birthday. I got out of the car. Tamsin saw me. She stood up. She did not run. She walked toward me with that same flat face I had heard in her voice, and when she got to me, she said, "Mama, he won't even let me get the rest of their clothes." I held her. I held her long enough that Marin came and wrapped herself around both our legs. Then I stepped back, wiped Tamsin's face with my thumb, and said, "Tell me from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." She told me, sitting in the back of the Suburban with Wesley on her lap and Marin buckled in beside her, eating crackers from my purse, and I listened without interrupting. 6 weeks earlier, Corbin had come home from a weekend trip with his mother and started behaving differently. Cold, distant, watching Tamsin, checking her phone when she was in the shower. She had not known what to do, so she had done what most women do, which is try harder. She made his favorite dinners. She suggested they go to therapy. He refused. He said she was imagining things. 3 weeks ago, Celine had invited Tamsin to lunch. Just the two of them. Tamsin had been surprised, and a little hopeful. Maybe, she thought, her mother-in-law was finally going to be kind. They had eaten at the country club. Celine had ordered a glass of white wine, and then, halfway through the salad course, Celine had reached into her handbag and pulled out a manila folder. Inside the folder were photographs. Photographs of Tamsin meeting a man in a hotel lobby in Charlotte. Photographs of Tamsin entering a hotel room. Photographs of Tamsin and the man sharing what appeared to be a long, intimate dinner. The man in the photographs was a financial advisor Tamsin had met with once, alone, 6 months earlier, to discuss opening a small savings account in her own name. Just her name. Not Corbin's. Not joint. She had told me about it at the time. She had said, "Mama, I just want a little something that's only mine, is I wrong?" I had told her it was the smartest thing she'd done in 5 years. The photographs were real. The story they told was not. Celine had slid the folder across the table and said in her soft, cream cashmere voice, "Darling, I think you and I both know what comes next. You can leave him quietly with your dignity, and I'll see to it you receive a generous settlement. Or you can fight, and I'll see to it that everyone in this city knows what kind of mother you are." Tamsin, my daughter, sat at that table and did not cry. She asked one question. "Does Corbin know?" Celine had smiled and said, "He will tonight." That was 3 weeks ago. Tamsin had gone home and confronted Corbin and tried to explain about the financial advisor and the savings account, and Corbin had not believed her because his mother had told him for 9 years that Tamsin was sneaky, was lazy, was beneath him, and he had finally found permission to believe it. He had moved into the guest room. He had told her to think about what she'd done. He had told her that if she made a scene, she would lose the children. She had spent 3 weeks trying to fix what could not be fixed. She had not called me because she did not want to worry me, and because, I think, she was ashamed. My daughter has always been ashamed of needing help. I do not know where she got that from. I have certainly never been too proud to ask. This morning, Tamsin had taken Wesley to a pediatrician appointment. A routine 1-year checkup. She had been gone for 90 minutes. When she came home, the locks had been changed, and there was a note on the front porch in Corbin's handwriting telling her where she could pick up her things. Her things were 3 garbage bags on the lawn. Marin had been picked up from preschool by her grandmother. Celine had taken my granddaughter. That was the line. That was the one she should not have crossed. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. When Tamsin was finished, I reached into my handbag, pulled out my phone, and made 3 calls. The first was to a woman named Della Forsyth, who has been my personal attorney for 22 years. I told her to meet me at my home in 2 hours and to bring the Haystrom Industries file. The second was to a man named Rousseau Vandermeer, who runs an investigative firm in Charlotte. I told him I needed everything he could find on Celine Hailstrom's private finances, her foundation, and her son Corbin, within 72 hours. The third was to my granddaughter's preschool. I asked the director, whom I had met once at a fundraiser, whether Marin had been signed out by Celine that afternoon. She had. With permission from Corbin, who had called ahead, I told the director, gently, that I would be sending my attorney with a copy of the temporary emergency custody order I was about to file, and I would appreciate it if no further pickups were authorized without my daughter's written consent. She apologized 3 times. I told her it was not her fault. Then I turned to Tamsin and said, "Sweetheart, I need to tell you some things I should have told you a long time ago." I told her about Quartz Hollow. I told her about her grandfather, my husband, and the small life insurance check I had turned into something larger. I told her about Harlan Hailstrom and the deal I had made in 1992. I told her that her mother-in-law had been living for 33 years in a house I owned the mortgage on, driving cars leased through a company I controlled, chairing a foundation funded by a trust I administered. Tamsin looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Mama, why didn't you ever tell me?" I said. "Because I never wanted you to marry a man for his money, or to be told you had married him for mine." She put her face in her hands. Marin reached across the seat and patted her arm. Wesley slept on. We got to my house at 4 in the afternoon. I had the housekeeper draw a bath for Tamsin and make grilled cheese sandwiches for the children. I put Marin in the room that had been Tamsin's growing up. I sat in my study, alone, for exactly 15 minutes. Then I went and got the leather book out of the writing desk drawer. Della arrived at 6. She is 61 years old, silver-haired, and has never lost a case I cared about. She took one look at the leather book and said, "Oh, Margaret, this is going to be fun." That is not my name. I am called something else. But Della has called me Margaret since law school, as a private joke between us about a woman we both used to know, and I won't tell you the real name because it isn't the point of the story. We worked through the night. By dawn, we had filed 3 things: an emergency motion for temporary custody on behalf of my daughter, supported by an affidavit describing the changed locks in the unauthorized pickup of Marin from preschool, a defamation suit against Celine Hailstrom, naming the photographs and the country club lunch, and a notice of corporate restructuring at Haystrom Industries, executed by the controlling shareholder of the parent holding company, which would be formally delivered to the office of the acting CEO at 9 the following Monday. The acting CEO, since Harlan's death 14 months ago, was Corbin Hailstrom, my son-in-law, the young man who had thrown my daughter onto a lawn with 3 garbage bags. Rousseau's report came in on Friday. It was 38 pages long. It detailed, among other things, the fact that Celine Hailstrom had been moving foundation funds into a personal account for approximately 11 years, in amounts small enough not to trigger an audit, but, in aggregate, totaling something close to $900,000. It detailed the fact that Corbin had been having an affair with a woman who worked at his country club for the better part of 2 years. It detailed several other things I will not bore you with. I read the report twice. I underlined 3 things. I put it in the leather book. On Monday at 9 in the morning, 2 attorneys from Della's firm walked into the lobby of Hailstrom Industries in Atlanta. They asked to see Corbin Hailstrom. They were shown to his office. They placed on his desk a sealed envelope containing the notice of corporate restructuring. They informed him, politely, that he had been removed as CEO effective immediately, that his company credit cards and corporate accounts had been frozen pending the transition, and that a security escort was waiting in the lobby to assist him with the removal of his personal belongings. Corbin, I am told, did not speak. He picked up his phone. He called his mother. His mother could not be reached because at 9:15 that same morning, a different pair of attorneys from a different firm, hired separately by me, was knocking on Celine Hailstrom's front door with a sheriff's deputy, serving her with the defamation suit, the custody affidavit, and a separate civil complaint regarding the misappropriation of foundation funds. Celine Hailstrom, my granddaughter's grandmother, the woman who had handed my daughter a folder of photographs at a country club, opened the door in a cream silk robe and said, in a voice that I have replayed in my mind many times since, There must be some mistake. There was not. By the end of that week, the family attorney who had been on retainer with the Halestroms for 20 years had quietly informed Celine that he could no longer represent her because of a conflict of interest he had only just discovered, namely that his firm's largest client was a holding company called Quartz Capital. By the end of the second week, Celine had been removed from the board of her own foundation, pending the misappropriation investigation. By the end of the third week, the photographs of Tamsin in the Charlotte Hotel had been traced to a private investigator Celine had hired in February, and that investigator had been deposed under oath, and his testimony, combined with the financial advisor's records, made very clear that Tamsin had spent approximately 45 minutes in that hotel lobby and restaurant, and had at no point entered a guest room. The hotel room photograph had been taken at a completely separate event, 6 weeks later, when Tamsin had attended a baby shower in the hotel's banquet hall. Corbin, meanwhile, filed for divorce. I had expected him to. I had expected him to ask for full custody. He did. The custody hearing was held in early March. I sat in the back. Tamsin sat at the petitioner's table with Bella. Corbin sat at the respondent's table with the third attorney he had hired in 6 weeks. Because the first two had withdrawn, the judge, a woman in her late 50s whom I had never met but who, I noticed, wore a small pin shaped like a magnolia, listened to the evidence for 2 days. On the afternoon of the second day, she granted Tamsin full physical and legal custody of both children, with supervised visitation for Corbin, pending the resolution of the criminal charges that had recently been filed against him in connection with his mother's foundation activities, in which he had, it turned out, played a small but documented role. Celine was not in the courtroom. She had not been able to attend because she was, at that moment, sitting in a deposition in another building in another part of town, attempting to explain to federal investigators why $900,000 of foundation money had been used to pay for, among other things, the renovation of her summer home in Highlands. I want to be careful here because I do not want this to sound like I enjoyed any of it. I did not. I am not, in my private heart, a woman who takes pleasure in the unmaking of other people. What I felt that afternoon in the courtroom, when the judge said the words full physical and legal custody, was not triumph. It was relief. The kind of relief you feel when a long fever finally breaks. My daughter wept. Quietly, the way she does. Marin, who was sitting beside me, asked if we could get ice cream. I said yes. Later that spring, after the divorce was finalized, and Tamsin and the children had moved into the guest cottage on my property, I went to see Celine Halestrom one time. Only once. I had not seen her in person since Tamsin's wedding. I drove myself, which I rarely do. I parked in a half-circle drive of the house she no longer technically owned. I rang the bell. She opened the door. She was wearing a cream silk robe again, but a different one, and her hair was not quite right, and I could see in her face that she had not been sleeping. She looked at me and did not recognize me at first. Then she did, and her mouth opened slightly, and she said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I came to introduce myself properly." She stared at me. I said, "We've met 4 times. At the rehearsal dinner. At the wedding. At Marin's christening. At Harlan's funeral. You have never once asked me what I do for a living. You assumed. I am here to correct the assumption." She did not invite me in. We stood on her porch. I told her in approximately 90 seconds in a voice barely above conversational exactly what I owned when I had purchased it and what her family's relationship to it had been for the past 33 years. I told her that the criminal proceedings would unfold as they would and that I had no intention of interfering with them in any direction. I told her that her son would be allowed supervised visitation with his children and that I would not stand in the way of that, because Marin and Wesley deserved a relationship with their father if their father could earn it back. I told her that she would not be permitted to be present at those visitations. I told her one more thing. I said, "You handed my daughter a folder of photographs and told her to choose between her dignity and her children. I want you to understand that this is what it feels like when you are the one being given the folder." She tried to say something. I did not let her finish. I turned around and walked back to my car. I drove home. Tamsin was on the porch with Wesley on her hip, watching Marin chase the cat across the lawn. She looked up when I pulled in. She did not ask where I had been. She handed me Wesley. He grabbed my earring, which is what he does, and I told him to be gentle, and he laughed, because that is what he also does. That was 8 months ago. Tamsin is doing the work. She sees a therapist twice a week. She is taking a class at the community college. She is sleeping better. Marin has started kindergarten. Wesley is walking now, badly, mostly into furniture. Corbin sees them on Saturdays with a court-appointed supervisor at a family services center in Atlanta. He has, by all accounts, been calm and appropriate at these visits. I hope he stays that way. I hope, in time, he becomes a real father to those children. I am not holding my breath, but I am keeping the door open because that is what you do for the children, even when it is not what you want to do for yourself. Celine Hailstrom pled guilty to 2 counts last month and is awaiting sentencing. She will likely receive probation and restitution. She will not see the inside of a prison. That is fine. Prison was never the point. I am telling you this story because I want you to hear something, and I want you to hear it from a woman who is older than you and has been quiet for a very long time. If someone in your life is wearing you down, slowly, with smiles and small remarks and offhand cruelties, please do not wait until they hand you the folder. Please do not assume that because you are polite, the world will be polite back to you. Please do not assume that because you have not raised your voice, you have not been heard. Sometimes you have been heard exactly, and the person hearing you has decided your quietness is permission. It is not permission. You do not need to scream. You do not need to scream. You do not need to scorch the earth. But you do need to keep your own records. You do need to know what you own. You do need to know who you are, separate from the man you married or the family you joined or the role they assigned you when you walked in the door. I sat on a bench once too, a very long time ago in a small town in North Carolina, with a 3-year-old daughter and a husband who had just died and no idea how I was going to feed her. Nobody came for me. I had to come for myself. So when my daughter called me from her bench, I came, and I will come every single time for as long as I am breathing. If you are sitting on a bench right now, somewhere, with your phone in your hand, please call someone, anyone, a sister, a friend, a neighbor, a helpline. You are not being dramatic. You are not catastrophizing. You are not too much. You are a person who has been waiting too long to be found. Get up. Make the call. The car is already coming. I have thought a great deal, in the months since that afternoon in Asheville, about how a person ends up sitting on a bench with 3 garbage bags. It does not happen in one day. It happens slowly, the way water finds a crack in a foundation. Celine did not destroy my daughter at that country club lunch. She destroyed her over 9 years of small remarks at dinner tables, and Tamsin's quiet smiling through each one was the soil in which the next remark grew. I am not blaming my daughter. I am telling you the truth, which is that cruelty needs permission to keep working, and silence is the closest thing to permission most of us ever give. I was silent too. For 9 years I watched and said nothing because I told myself it was not my place. That was not wisdom. That was cowardice dressed up in good manners. A mother who watches her daughter being slowly diminished and calls her restraint respect is lying to herself. I am 63 years old and I am still learning what is mine to say and what is not. Here's what I have come to believe. Decency is not the same thing as quietness. You can be a good woman and still refuse to be folded smaller every year to make room for someone else's comfort. Tamsin's gentleness was real, and it was beautiful, and it was also by the end, killing her. The strength she has found these last 8 months did not replace her gentleness. It is underneath it now, the way a foundation is underneath a house. She is still kind, she is just no longer available for demolition. And Corbin? I think about him too. He was not born cruel. He was raised by a woman who taught him that love was conditional and approval was currency, and when his mother handed him a folder of photographs, he believed her because he had been believing her since he was 7 years old. That is not an excuse. He is a grown man, and he changed the locks on a woman who had borne him 2 children. But it is perhaps a reason. And reasons matter, because reasons are the only thing that tell you whether a person can change. What I want any woman listening to me to take from this is small and old and very simple. Know what is yours. Not your husband's, not your in-laws, not the family you married into. Yours. A small account in your own name. A trade you have not let go rusty. A friend who knew you before. A notebook in a drawer. Keep something. Anything. Not because you expect the worst, but because the people who love you should never be the only thing holding you up. The day you call your mother from a bench should not be the day you discover you have no second number to dial. I came for my daughter because I had been preparing, quietly, for 40 years to be the kind of woman who could. That preparation is available to every woman, at every age, starting on any ordinary Tuesday. Begin today. Begin with one small thing that is only yours. The bench is not your future. It is only the place you sit while you wait for yourself to arrive.